I almost didn't go that Thanksgiving. I had the excuse ready, work deadline, long drive, my cat needed medication. All of it was true. None of it was the real reason. The real reason was that every time I pulled into my parents' driveway, something in my chest tightened the way a fist closes around something it doesn't want to let go of. Not love. Something older than love. Something that looked like love from the outside, but felt on the inside, like holding your breath underwater and telling yourself you're fine. But my mother had called 3 times in 2 days, and my aunt had texted saying the whole family would be there, and somewhere between the second cup of coffee and staring at my ceiling at 6 in the morning, I decided that maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe it would be different this time. Maybe I just needed to show up, eat the food, smile at the right moments, and drive home by 8. I had been telling myself that same story for about 12 years. I was 31 years old. I had a good job project manager at a mid-sized logistics firm in Charlotte. I had my own apartment, a savings account I was genuinely proud of, and a therapist I saw every other Tuesday who had been gently, consistently, for almost 2 years, asking me why I kept going back to a family that left me feeling emptier every single time I walked out their front door. I never had a clean answer for her. I still don't think I do. But I think part of it was that I needed to believe the version of my family that existed in holiday photos, the one where everyone was laughing. The one where I was included. I drove 4 hours to get to my parents' house in Greenville, South Carolina. I had made that drive so many times I could do it half asleep. And on that particular Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, I mostly did. I sang along to a playlist I hadn't updated since college. I stopped for gas and a terrible coffee somewhere off I-85. I told myself this was going to be fine. I arrived around 9:30 at night. The porch light was on, which I always took as a good sign. My mother leaving the light on meant she had remembered I was coming, which sounds like a low bar, but was, in our family, not always a given. I grabbed my overnight bag from the back seat, walked up the familiar path, and let myself in with the key I had carried on my keychain for over a decade. The house smelled like it always did cedar, something sweet on the stove, and underneath it all, that particular smell that is just your childhood home and nothing else. My mother was in the kitchen. My father was watching television in the den. My younger sister Becca was curled up on the couch with her boyfriend, who I had met twice, and whose name I still had to think about before saying, Derek. His name was Derek. Everything looked normal. I told myself everything was normal. And then I went upstairs to put my bag in the guest room, the room that had been my room, until I left at 18 and had been reclassified almost immediately, and on my way down the hall, I passed the wall. My parents had always kept a wall of family photos in the upstairs hallway. It had been there my entire life. School photos, vacation shots, birthday parties, Christmases. I had walked past that wall 1,000 times. I knew every photo on it the way you know the back of your own hand. But something was different. I stopped. There was a new frame in the center of the wall, large, the kind you get custom made, the kind that costs money, the kind that says, "This is important, this is permanent." It was a family portrait. Recent, my parents looked the way they looked now, a little older. My mother's hair shorter than I remembered it being at Christmas last year. Becca was in it, standing between them, beaming. Derek was in it, one arm around my sister, looking like he'd been part of this family his whole life. I was not in it. I stood there in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. My bag was still in my hand. The television was on downstairs. I could hear my mother humming something in the kitchen. I stood there and I looked at this portrait of my family, my parents, my sister, her boyfriend of 8 months, and I looked at the space where I was not, and I thought, very clearly, in a way that felt almost clinical, they did this on purpose. Because here is the thing. I was not simply absent from the photo the way you might be absent if you'd been traveling, or if the photographer had arrived while you were in the bathroom. I was not absent because the timing was bad or the planning was last minute. I lived 4 hours away. I visited 4 or 5 times a year. My parents had my phone number. If they had wanted me in this portrait, they would have asked me to come. They would have called. They would have scheduled it around a time when I was already going to be here. They had not done any of those things. They had scheduled a family portrait without telling me, had it framed, and had hung it in a place where I would absolutely see it, where anyone who came upstairs would see it. Center of the hallway, eye level, a family of 4 that was, by every definition I had ever been given, supposed to be a family of 5, or at minimum, a family of 4, and I was one of the 4. I set my bag down in the guest room. I went to the bathroom. I ran cold water over my wrists, the way my therapist had taught me to do when I felt my thoughts start to spiral. I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, quietly, to my own reflection, "Do not make a scene tonight. Do not cry. Do not ask. Just wait." I had learned, over the years, that asking my parents direct questions about things that hurt me almost never produced honest answers. What it produced was a conversation about how sensitive I was, how I always made everything about myself, how they couldn't do anything right. My mother had a particular gift for this, a way of responding to legitimate pain by instantly becoming the victim of it, so that within 4 minutes of me saying that hurt me, I would somehow be the one apologizing. I had fallen for that dynamic for most of my adult life. I was not going to fall for it that night. So I went back downstairs. I helped set the table. I answered questions about work. I watched Becca show my mother photos on her phone, the two of them leaning together the way they always had, the way that had always made me feel like I was watching something through a window I didn't have a key to. I ate the pasta my mother had made. I laughed at the right moments. I performed normalcy with the professionalism of someone who had been doing it since childhood. And the whole time, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, because here's the part I need to explain. The part that made this more than just a photo. The part that meant this portrait was not simply a careless omission or even a petty act of exclusion. It was a symbol of something much larger that had been happening for a long time, and that I had been allowing to happen because I had not yet understood the full shape of it. When I was 24, my parents hit a rough patch financially. My father's small contracting business had slowed down. A client had stiffed them on a big job, and they were behind on the mortgage by 3 months. I was 2 years into my job, making decent money, and I had some savings. They asked if I could help. I said yes without hesitation, because they were my parents, and because that is what you do. Over the next 6 years, I gave them money regularly. Not borrowed, gave. My mother never once called it a loan. My father never signed anything. It was always framed as family helping family, which I believed, because I wanted to believe it, because the alternative was too ugly to look at directly. I paid for Becca's first 2 semesters of community college when my parents said they couldn't cover it. I paid for my mother's dental work twice. I covered a car repair for my father that came in at just over $3,000. When my parents refinanced the house 4 years ago, I contributed $15,000 toward the costs, because my mother called me crying and said they were going to lose everything. I did not do any of this because I was asked nicely or because there was a plan to pay me back. I did it because I was the responsible one, the one who had figured out how to build a stable life, and who therefore, by family logic, was obligated to share the foundation of it with everyone who hadn't. Thanksgiving dinner was quiet in the way that family dinners are quiet when everyone is carefully not talking about something. My father made a toast. Becca talked about a job she was thinking of applying for. My mother fussed over whether the pie had set properly. Derek talked about football. I sat at the table where I had eaten 1,000 meals and tried to figure out what I was going to do. Because 2 weeks before that Thanksgiving, something had happened. I had been on the phone with my father about something minor. I don't even remember what. Something about the holidays, and in the background I had heard my mother say something to him, not realizing I could hear, about the will. Specifically, she had said, "Don't bring that up with her. We already handled it." I had gone very still on that phone call. I had said nothing. I had filed it away. And then I had called a lawyer. Not because I was certain anything was wrong, but because I was 31 years old, and I had given my parents a significant amount of money over the course of several years, and I had nothing on paper, no records from their end, no acknowledgement. And I had heard those words, "We already handled it," and something in me had finally stopped trusting the story I had been telling myself. My lawyer was a woman named Patricia, who had the kind of calm, precise manner that made me feel both better and worse about everything. She asked me to document what I could remember. She made some inquiries. And what she found, or rather, what she was able to piece together from what I gave her and what was accessible in public records, was that my parents had, approximately 8 months prior, updated their estate plan. Everything to Becca. A trust set up in Becca's name. The house, such assets as they had, any proceeds from the business. Not a cent to me, not even mentioned. I want to be precise here, because precision matters. They were allowed to do this. It was their estate. They could leave everything to whoever they chose. I was an adult. I was not entitled to an inheritance. All of that is true. What was also true was that I had given them somewhere in the range of $42,000 over 6 years, not borrowed, given, with no documentation, no agreement, no acknowledgement that it was anything other than a daughter helping her family. And they had taken that money, used it to stabilize their finances, and then, 8 months ago, had quietly and legally arranged to leave everything to my sister without telling me, without discussing it, without so much as a phone call. The portrait in the hallway was not a mistake. It was a message. Whether they knew it consciously or not, it was a message about who was family and who was not, who was inside the frame and who had been cropped out, not just of the photograph, of everything. Patricia and I had been working on something for those 2 weeks. Not a lawsuit, necessarily, though that option was on the table. What we had prepared was a demand letter. Formal, precise, documented. It laid out the timeline of what I had contributed, the amounts, the dates I could verify through my own bank records. It laid out what Patricia believed was a legitimate legal claim for unjust enrichment, which is a real legal concept that basically means you cannot accept significant financial benefit from someone under an implicit expectation of family relationship and then act as though that person has no standing at all. It referenced the estate changes. It requested either formal acknowledgement of the contributions as a debt to be repaid or an adjustment to the estate documents reflecting my fair inclusion. It was not a love letter, but it was not cruelty either. It was, Patricia had said, the kind of document that people respond to because it makes the cost of continued dishonesty extremely clear. I had printed it out before I left Charlotte. It was in a manila folder in my overnight bag, in the guest room upstairs, on the bed where I had slept as a child. I had not planned exactly when to give it to them. I had thought maybe the morning, before I drove home. But sitting at that Thanksgiving table, watching my father pour himself a second glass of wine and make a joke about leftovers, watching my mother pat Becca's hand and tell her she was so proud of everything she was doing, I made a decision. After dinner, while Becca and Derek were doing dishes and my parents were settling into the living room with their wine, I went upstairs. I got the folder, I held it in my hands for a moment, and took a breath. I thought about the girl who had driven 4 hours because she wanted to believe in the version of her family that existed in the holiday photos. I thought about all the times I had run cold water over my wrists in their bathroom and told myself not to make a scene. I thought about $42,000 and a portrait in a hallway and 8 months of legal paperwork that my parents had signed without telling me. And then I went back downstairs. My parents looked up when I came into the living room. My mother had that expression she sometimes got a kind of preemptive wariness, like she already knew that whatever was coming was something she'd have to manage. My father had the television remote in his hand. I did not sit down. I stood in the middle of the room, and I said, calmly, because I had practiced this, because I had said it to my own reflection, probably 40 times. Before I go home tomorrow, I need to give you something. I held out the folder. My father looked at it. My mother looked at me. Neither of them reached for it immediately, and for a moment the three of us just existed in that suspended space where something is about to change and everyone can feel it. "What is this?" my mother asked. "It's a document from my attorney," I said. "I'd like you to read it tonight or this weekend, whenever you're ready. We don't need to discuss it right now, but I do need you to read it." My father put the remote down. He took the folder from my hand without opening it. Which is exactly what I had expected. He never wanted to react to anything directly, always needed time to process in private. My mother's expression had shifted. She was trying to read my face the way she had always tried to read my face, looking for the lever, looking for the thing she could say to make this into a conversation about my sensitivity or my tendency to overdramatize. But I had changed the terms, because this was not a conversation about feelings. It was not me asking them to acknowledge that they had hurt me, which was the kind of ask they had spent my entire life deflecting. It was a legal document. It had Patricia's letterhead on it. It had specific dollar amounts. It had a response deadline. "We'll look at it," my father said. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it, because that was all I needed from that moment. Not a confession, not an apology, just, I see you. I have documentation. And this is no longer something you get to pretend doesn't exist. I drove home the next morning. I did not stay for Thanksgiving lunch. I told them I had something I needed to get back for, which was not entirely untrue. I had plans with a friend, and I had a life in Charlotte, and I did not need to sit at their table for another 5 hours performing normalcy in a family portrait I was not in. My mother hugged me at the door with the particular quality of hug that means I am frightened and I don't know how to say so. My father shook my hand, which he almost never did, which told me the folder had done what the folder was supposed to do. Becca didn't come out to say goodbye. She never did when there was tension in the air. She was very good at making herself invisible when things got uncomfortable, which is a skill I had never quite mastered. I had always been the one who stayed in the room. I am not that person anymore. I drove home with the windows down even though it was cold. I called Patricia from the road and told her I had delivered it. She said that was good, that she'd follow up with a formal mailing on Monday. I called my friend Sophie, who had heard most of this story in pieces over the past several months, and I told her what I'd done. She cried a little, which made me cry a little, and then she said she was proud of me, and I believed her in a way that I had not believed the people who were supposed to say that to me. 3 weeks later, my parents responded through their own attorney. They disputed some of the amounts. They did not dispute the timeline. They did not claim that the contributions had never happened. Their attorney used the word gifts repeatedly, which Patricia had anticipated. She had anticipated a lot of what they said, which is one of the things you pay a good attorney for. What followed was not a dramatic courtroom scene. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect that kind of thing from stories like this, and life is usually quieter and slower than the stories we tell about it. What followed was 5 months of back and forth, a formal mediation session in a conference room in Charlotte, where I sat on one side of a table and my parents sat on the other side, and a mediator helped us reach an agreement without anyone having to go to court. They agreed to repay $28,000 over a structured timeline, not the full 42, because some of what I had given was genuinely unverifiable, and Patricia advised me that the fight for the rest was not worth the cost. The estate was amended to include me equitably. There was a signed acknowledgement, formal, legal, permanent, that I was a beneficiary of my parents' estate. I will not pretend this made everything fine. It did not make everything fine. My relationship with my parents is something I still don't have a clean word for. We talk occasionally. My mother sent me a birthday card this year. I sent flowers when my father had his knee surgery in the spring. We are not close in the way I once needed us to be, and I have spent a lot of time, a lot of Tuesday sessions, with my therapist, sitting with the grief of that. The grief of a family you wanted and a family you actually have, and the long, slow work of learning to tell the difference between those two things. What I can tell you is that I am not performing anything anymore. I don't drive 4 hours hoping this time will be different. I don't run cold water over my wrists in their bathroom and tell myself not to feel what I feel. I don't sit at tables where I am not in the portrait and smile for a family that has cropped me out of its story. I don't give things that cost me everything to people who have categorized me as optional. I have a good life in Charlotte. I have Sophie and 2 other friends who have known me long enough to call me out when I'm spiraling. I have a therapist who is genuinely excellent and who once said to me, in a session that I still think about, that the hardest thing is not recognizing when people are treating you badly. The hardest thing is giving yourself permission to respond to it as if you matter. I matter. It took me a long time to live inside that sentence instead of just saying it. Some days I still have to remind myself. But I know what it felt like to stand in a hallway and look at a portrait and understand with sudden terrible clarity that the people who were supposed to see you have spent years learning not to. And I know what it felt like to stop asking them to look differently and to start building a life that does not require their vision of me in order to exist. The folder on the coffee table was not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I have thought about it a lot, and I think the word revenge gets used for things that are actually something simpler and more necessary. It was not revenge. It was evidence. It was the moment I stopped accepting a version of reality that had been written without my input and offered a different version, one with documentation, one with witnesses, one with a response deadline. If they could decide, quietly and legally, that I was not worth including in the frame, I could decide, quietly and legally, that being in the frame was not actually the point. The point was always the house, and the money, and the years of being the one who showed up, who helped, who made everything work, while being treated as someone peripheral to the story of this family. The point was that I had a story too, and I was going to tell it. I still have the portrait on my wall, not their portrait, my own. A photo from 2 summers ago, Sophie and me and 2 other friends on a camping trip in Asheville. We are all sunburned and grinning, and someone's hair is blowing across her face, and it is deeply, completely imperfect. I am in it. I am laughing. I am fully in the frame. That is what I keep. That is what I carry. I don't rehearse the conversations that went nowhere. I don't rewrite the ending of a story that was never actually mine to control. I built a different life, the one I would have built sooner, if I had trusted myself sooner, and I live in it every day. And when I look in the mirror in the mornings, I don't see someone who survived her family by shrinking. I see someone who stopped shrinking. And it turned out that was the whole work.